Anyway, so I'm going to introduce our first presenters, and they are Ms. Joni Nelson, who works for the Kentucky State University College of Agriculture, Communities and Sciences in the Land Grant Program. And Joni is the manager of the Small Scale Farm Grant, and she also facilitates value-added processing training for farmers across the state. There are several mobile processing units that are available under Joni's supervision. One is a fruit and vegetable processing kitchen, and the other is a sorghum press. There's also an autoclave, which can be used to sterilize beehives throughout the state. Joni holds a bachelor's degree in horticulture from Auburn University and a master's from Kentucky State. And she'll be joined by Mr. Matt Behrends, who is a research and extension associate in KSU's land grant program, who provides instruction and support for the fermentation and distillation program. He also manages the commercial kitchen here at the research farm and helps producers with value-added production. So if we could welcome Ms. Joni Nelson and Matt Behrends.
Matt said he's hiding over at the side until it's his turn, so we'll just let him stay over there for a minute. Matt, wave. Yeah, we'll hear from him in just a minute. Ooh, my goodness. Okay. So he said a lot of the stuff that I was going to say, but that's okay. We'll go over a few things. Like I said, my name is Joni Nelson, and I've been at KSU for about 12 years now. And I've been in the state since 2009, and I really, really love Kentucky. It's very progressive. There's a lot of things going on here in Kentucky that I just love about it. We heard Dr. Young mention the upcoming Third Thursdays. We're going to talk a little bit about some of those. Thursday in April 20th, is the Farmers Market Third Thursday. So if you're thinking about selling some of your home-based products or something like that, or if you're interested in some water quality or farm-to-school programs, we're going to be talking about those at the April 3rd Thursday. We're going to go ahead and get right into this. We're talking about home processing today. How many in here have processed their own food or preserved their own foods at home? Woo, I'm talking to experts. Y'all can probably teach me some stuff up in here. I'm telling you. So y'all know there's tons of different types of products that you can process. There's fermented foods, there's jams, jellies, which is a low-risk food. There's salsas, barbecue sauce, vinegars, hot sauce, that's kind of a higher-risk food. Syrups with your honeys, your maple, and your sorghum. I know somebody's going to be talking about bees later on. You have your baked goods, your soaps, your lotions, your beverages, pet treats, things like that. And for home processing and commercial processing, when it comes to the actual process, is kind of the same. It's the rules and regulations that change when it comes to processing your home foods in order to sell. So that's when some of the things change a little bit, but we're going to be talking about that here in a minute. So you're thinking about where do you start, right? So you want to think about your processing types. How are you going to process this food? What kind of equipment do you need? What kind of canning equipment do you need? Are you going to freeze it? Are you going to dry it? Do you need bags? What kind of recipes are you going to use? Is this your grandmother's favorite recipe? Is this from the Ball canning book? Where are you getting your ingredients? Are you growing those ingredients? How many here grow your own food? See? So a lot of you are growing your own ingredients that you're putting into these home processed foods. Where are you going to store these foods? Is it going to be in a root cellar? Is it going to be in the basement? Is it going to be in a cabinet? You got to think about temperatures when you're thinking about storage. What's your marketing strategy? Are you going to market these products? Are you going to be a home-based processor and market these products locally? So there are several different types of home preservation methods. There's canning, freezing, and drying. Those are your basic methods that you kind of go through. Your choice of method depends on what kind of product you have, the consistency of that product, and the guideline. There's certain safe guidelines when it comes to processing certain foods. There's certain foods that you don't want to boil and heat and can. You want to freeze those because they're fresher and they taste better. There's some that have to be pressure canned under steam, and there's some that could be processed just in a hot water bath. You want to maintain the safety of that product because you've got to worry about microorganisms, enzymes that may break down your foods, things like that. So, how does the preservation method work? So freezing, as we know, it reduces the temperature. Basically, it stops the growth of those microorganisms. It doesn't sterilize your food or destroy those spoilage organisms, but it can keep away some of the chemical changes like oxidation, or they could potentially come back once you thaw that food out. Everybody's seen a potato go brown, an apple go brown, something like that. The enzymes that are naturally present in foods, their activity can lead to the deterioration of that food and the quality of that food. If you're drying something, it removes moisture from the food so that bacteria can't grow. If your water activity is low, then it's really hard for that bacteria to get in there and grow. Breads, as you know, some of them have lower water activity than others, so some breads may mold faster than others. You've seen that, I'm sure, on your counters. Drying slows down the action of the enzymes, but it also, again, it doesn't inactivate them. So once it reaches a certain temperature or certain moisture, those enzymes can just creep back up on you. Canning applies heat, which basically is in glass jars heated to certain temperatures. Does anybody know who the father of canning is? So until I was doing this presentation, I'd heard about it and I thought, well, I want to find that out. Nicholas Appert actually is the father of canning. He created a method of preserving foods as a response to the government asking for that particular, like they needed some way to preserve foods for the Army and the Navy to use. So he developed this canning method. He's considered the father of canning. However, at the time that he created it, he had no clue how it worked. He didn't understand the mechanism, he just knew that it actually worked. So that's why he's called kind of the father of canning. He started one of the first bottling companies in Paris called La Maison Appert, however you want to say that, you know. I'm not very good with So, what is canning? I'm sure everyone in the room can probably answer this question, right? It's basically the process of using glass jars to preserve food. Once the canned foods are properly prepared, the jar's processing using one or two canning methods. You can use a hot water bath, or you can use steam, which is pressure canning under steam. Pressure canning allows a much higher temperature, so you're going to kind of create shelf-stable foods under either one of those. It just depends on your type of product, and we're going to go over those here in a little bit. So, boiling water bath, temperatures are about 212 degrees. Now, both of these, when you're doing a boiling water bath, you want to put that into warm jars. You don't want to put that in a cold jar, you want to put that in a sterilized jar. Acid foods can be processed under boiling water bath process, which is, you all probably know what that is. It's basically, you heat the food, you put it, it's like jams and jellies. Then you can it and you hold it at a certain temperature for 10 to 12 to 15 minutes, depending on the consistency in the jar. The addition of acidic ingredients would be an acidified food, which could be used under the boiling water bath method, which would be if you're adding lemon juice to something. So that would be an acidified food because you're trying to bring that pH down. If your pH is above 4.6, then it's considered a low acid food and you want to use a pressure canning method. As you can see here, there's a couple of different types of pressure canners and then a hot water bath canister pot also. So low acid foods have pH higher than 4.6. It's the opposite of what you would think. So a higher pH is considered a low acid food. And those could be meats, poultry, milks, fresh vegetables, except for most tomatoes. There's some of those heirloom tomatoes that don't have that high acidity in it. Some of your purple tomatoes don't really have that really high acidity in it. And so you have to make sure that you're checking that along the way. Most mixtures of low acid and acidified foods have pH values above 4.6 unless you're adding that lemon juice, that citric acid. Think of chow chows and things like that. You know, you've got some low acid. Maybe you're doing a salsa that's got corn in it. So you've got a low acid food and a high acid food mixed together. You've got to be able to check that pH. Sauerkrauts, jams, you know, fruit butters, apple butter. I'm sure y'all made apple butter before. I've had some really good, I never had apple butter before I moved to Kentucky. It was really good. Acidic foods, which is below 4.6, which is high acid. I know it's a little opposite there. Like I said, your tomatoes, figs, pears are a little borderline. You have to check the consistency or the pH of those also, because again, they're kind of like that tomato. They could have a high pH or they could have a lower pH. Fermented foods, which is your sauerkraut, pickles, yeast, they break down the carbohydrates, so you want your acidity high in order to process under a hot water bath. Your low acid foods, greater than 4.6. Again, vegetables, meats, poultry, soups, stews. You put some of those in jars. A lot of people will pre-make a lot of your soups and stews and put those in the canning jars and pressure can them. That if you have any meat in it, you definitely want to pressure can it. That kind of helps you get rid of some of those nasty critters. Speaking of nasty critters, so let's talk a little bit about food contamination. Does anybody know what a foodborne illness is? Anybody ever had one? Yeah, I have too. Trust me, it's not fun. They're basically caused by eating foods that are contaminated with bacteria or other harmful substances. So the food contamination could be a chemical hazard, a physical hazard, or a biological hazard. So a chemical hazard would be basically something got in there that wasn't supposed to. Maybe you had some cleaning supplies on the counter while you were making something and kind of knocked it in. Physical hazard could be maybe you're grinding meat and part of the grinder fell off in there. So you've got to have a magnet and kind of check just in case. Or biological hazards, which would be your enzymes and things like that. Some of your critters you want to avoid. Botulism. We're going to talk a little bit about this because home canned vegetables have been a significant cause in botulism outbreaks in the United States from 1999 to 2008. 75% or 75 of those 116 were caused by home prepared foods and 33 were caused by home canned foods. So please be careful when you're processing your foods. You want to make sure that you don't get nausea, blurred vision, difficulty swallowing, speaking, possible death. Nobody wants that, right? So you've got to check your food. You want to avoid your botulism. So in order to avoid your botulism, they're very hard to destroy in a boiling water temperature. The higher canner temperatures is what's going to destroy your botulism. When we talk about that low acid food, that's when you get into worrying about the botulism a lot. At temperatures between 240 and 250, the time to destroy the bacteria for low acid canned foods could be 20 to 100 minutes. So if you're using that pressure canner, you want to make sure that you're watching that temperature on the top, you're watching that pressure. And that PSI, is between 10 to 15, depending on your altitude and temperatures and things like that. So, in order to avoid and prevent botulism, there's several things that you can do. Do not modify the recipe. That recipe was pretty much developed by maybe scientific extension. Maybe it's a tried and true family recipe and nobody else has, had any issues with it. You want to look at your jar and what food is going into that jar. Where's your heat penetration in that jar? A lot of times when you're pressure canning your hot water bath, you've got the middle of the jar. That's kind of your cold spot, so you've got to be careful with that. Okay, I got ahead of myself there, but anyway, use recommended canners. If it's rusted, don't use it. If there's some chip out of it, if one of the latches on the side doesn't work right, don't use it because you probably are not going to get that temperature and you're not going to get that heat that you need. Don't rush it. You're making home foods. You've done this 100 times, I'm sure. Don't rush the recipe. Don't rush the process because you forget something or you mess up the temperature, or you could potentially you could potentially harm yourself as well. The equipment. So when we get to equipment, what you want to do is on your jars, you want to check for chipped glasses. How many have bought canning supplies from, I won't name a retail place, but a local retail place, and you get home and half the jars are chipped around the edge or on the top? I mean, you've got to be careful with that, because that one jar that's chipped has contaminated every single jar in there, because you don't know where those chips went to. So you want to wash, rinse, sanitize. We run ours through the dishwasher here. In order to keep them hot, we put them in the oven. So you can put them in a boiler, but we put them in the oven at 215, and we keep it, and we pull it out right before our product is done to put it in. Keep it hot over boiling water or in the oven. Don't reuse the flat lids. How many of you reused the flat lids before? And did they seal? Because the problem with those is once you use them, especially if you wash them, that rubber breaks down and it doesn't want to reseal. And you've got to keep the flats warm for the proper seal. So I simmer them in a little pot on the stove, a little saute pan, that's kind of what we use. So this is one of our local producers, Rising Suns Winery. She's just down the road in Lawrenceburg. She makes a lot of jams and jellies, and she makes a Pearl Paul bourbon jam that is really, really good. And she's worked with us through our commercial kitchen. Gina and Joey, they've done some jams and jellies. There's this book out there called The Home Canning. It's actually recommended by the USDA for home canning. It's one of the things that they recommend. So recipes, I mentioned this a little bit earlier. Where are you getting your recipes? Is it going to be from an old cookbook? Is it going to be USDA, a land-grant university? The Ball Canning book, you want to make sure that it's dated 1898, where are we at, y'all? 1989 or later. Let's talk about storing a little bit. Did I cut the bottom of this slide off? I may have. It's okay. When you're storing your food, you want to make sure you label and you date that food, because you don't want to do like I did when my mother passed away and we were cleaning out her house. She had an entire cabinet full of jams and jellies, and I'm telling you, I didn't know which one was which. She used to make a kudzu jelly, and I have not seen it since, and I can't find the recipe. But she used to make a kudzu jelly, and I'm telling you, we went through every one of those jars going, is this kudzu, is this kudzu, is this? We didn't know because she didn't have anything labeled, and the labels that she did have, it had been so long, they had been in there for so long, they may have been kept a little longer than they needed to be. 1 year. 1 year is basically when they kind of, depending on what it is, you don't want to typically keep things for more than a year. You want to use that up. But, I mean, if it was the kudzu jelly, I wanted to keep that. I wanted to like mementalize, that. But anyway, don't go through that. Rusted lids, things like that. Yeah. Refrigerate unsealed jars. So all those jars that we kind of went through and kind of ate out of, put them back in the fridge. Avoid extreme temperatures. You don't want extreme highs or extreme lows. You know what happens when a glass jar is extreme lows? We've had that happen plenty of times. If it's too hot, sitting in the back of your car. Now, I'm not going to mention how many Coke cans have exploded in the back of my car when I was younger and scared the devil out of me. But it does happen, so you've got to watch about those extreme heats. For best quality, like I said, use within a year. If it's sealed, stored below 95 degrees, typically 50 to 70, it enhances the retention of that product. So let's talk a little bit about a home-based processor. Is there anyone in here, potentially, that may want to sell your home product? Okay? So you want to be a home-based processor. You can do that in the state of Kentucky. You can sell directly to an individual, so I can sell it to you. I can put it on my online store. However, I have to hand deliver that. So it's direct-to-consumer sales is all you can do with home-based products. Doesn't matter if it's jams, jellies, granolas, wedding cakes, birthday cakes, cupcakes, doesn't matter. You have to sell that product individually from person to person. And only certain products are allowed under the home-based processor. You can also sell at a certified market registered by Farm Bureau or a Kentucky certified farmers markets, which if you're interested in what Kentucky certified farmers markets are and where they are in the state, come see us in April and come see Sharon Spencer from KDA. I'm pointing at her in the back. She has a booth out there also, if you're interested a little bit more about that. And if I mess up on this PowerPoint presentation, she's gonna get me. Home-based processing became a law a long time ago, but it changed in 2019, and it's subject to change on a yearly basis, basically. We hope it stays the same, but with legislation, always watch and always pay attention to that. The label must contain, this is a home-based product. You're required a registration for $50 yearly. It can't be sold, like I said, in grocery stores, retail outlets, or shipped to consumers or anything. Only low-risk products can be sold. There's a list of those products. I have a list. I can get you a list of those. And you have to have gross annual sales under $60,000. I don't really have a lot of farmers that are doing micro-based or home-based that are over 60. And if they are, they've already went commercial and they're not home-based anymore. Home-based microprocessor. So home-based, let's go back. Home-based processor is basically jams, jellies, breads, granolas, things like that. Dried herbs. Your home-based microprocessors, this is some of your barbecue sauces. Those low-acid foods I was mentioning, that's where this comes in. The only thing about the home-based processor microprocessor that's different is you have to actually grow the main ingredient if you're going to be a home-based microprocessor. You have to go through a training, which is $50 a year, or $50, and then $10 every renewal in 3 years. You also have to pay the food safety branch $50. They're going to get their money. So, again, label must contain this product is home-based. You can produce higher risk products, must have a farm-grown ingredient in it, main ingredient. Products can be sold at Kentucky certified farm markets with Farm Bureau or with KDA and on your farm. Requires an approved water source. If you have a cistern, they may or may not approve you. If you have a well, you have to have that water source approved. If you're interested in this, you can submit recipes through Ann Hall Norris. This is her phone number and contact information. It's annhall.norris@uky.edu. And then her phone number is 859-257-1812. You can submit recipes through her. So let's go over these two real quick. Home-based versus micro-based. Home-based microprocessor. I mess it up every time, Sharon. So if you grow the ingredient, you could be either one. If you don't grow the ingredient, then you have to stay under home-based processing, and you can't do some of the lower risk acidified foods. And somebody took my thing away. I can't see my slides anymore. So with that, does anybody have any questions? Yes? How do you test the pH is the question. They actually have meters that you can get. We've got some from Amazon. We've got some from a couple of different places. There's a home-based processor. Megan just sent me the link the other day to get a lot of these products from. You could use test strips, either one. I like using the meters because then you get a better reading if you're using a pH meter. So you would crack open a jar, and what we do is we test it. We test the product before it goes into the jar, and then we test the product 24 hours to make sure the pH has not changed. Sometimes it could go lower, sometimes it could go higher. So you do want to check your pH at least twice. especially if you're doing a new product, something that you've never done before. And if you're having any issues, you want to test that product. I saw another hand in the back. So the difference between home-based processing and micro-based processing is micro-based processing is basically used for those farmers who are wanting to create those low-risk products, which would be chow chow or green beans or corn, canned corn, things like that. Those pressure canned items are the ones that are required underneath the home-based microprocessor. Because if you want to make those and sell those, you have to be home-based or you have to be commercial. Home-based micro or commercial. The home-based is typically reserved for those low-risk foods. Nothing can be refrigerated underneath home-based. If you have to have refrigeration, you need to go commercial or something like that. I'm going to pull that back up real quick. Right here.
I'm just curious, is there any kind of a website that has, that has consolidated, like whether it's by county or whatever, like who's in your area, who's doing processing, or that you could sort of just Google, like, oh, I want to know who's making honey or who's making, just as a consumer sort of resource?
So as a consumer resource and as a producer, there's a couple of different ways you can find out that information. KDA has a list of Kentucky Proud vendors that are in the state on their website. The Center for Crop Diversification gives out price reports and has a lot of really good information on their websites on what's like prices of certain products that are sold at farmers markets. I believe Fran with Farm Bureau has a list of the certified roadside stands. Now you would probably have to look at their particular website to see what they sell, but there are lists out there for that. Any other questions? I'm going to take one more and then I'm going to get Matt up here. In the back.
Are those $60,000 limits combined, or could you have separate product lines where you can go up to that limit for each?
Sharon? I think it is too. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's combined. So if you make more than $60,000 and you're doing either or, then you need to be commercial. Because if you're making that much product on that small of a scale, sometimes it's harder to keep that consistency sometimes.
And Joni, I'll touch something really quick. I'm Sharon Spencer. Good morning, everybody. Great crowd in here. I'm Sharon Spencer. I'm with Kentucky Department of Agriculture, and I do the farmers markets and agritourism. I also work with Kentucky Proud. We got a booth set up out here. I do have a farmers market manual that does have resource information in it about like what Joni has up here on the screen. Talk about home-based processing. You talked about the home-based processing. We just recently changed that a couple of years ago. We had what was called a home baker's bill. And so that went before legislation. Before the home-based processing, you had to grow the primary ingredient going into that product that you were going to be making. What changed with the what we call the home baker's bill, the home-based processing now, you can buy your products wherever you want to buy it, which it was a little downside to us. Producers didn't like it, but it opened the door to where you can actually sell it at special events, festivals, any place that you do a direct-to-customer sale. You can advertise it online. You cannot sell it online. You still have to come to me, pay me for my product, and I have to hand it to you. But I've got a lot of information out here at my table. Farmers Market Manual, stop by and see me, and I can get you all that information.
Thank you very much, Sharon. Sharon's also going to be here next month for the April 3rd Thursday, so we can definitely bombard her with some questions as well. What we have up next is, one more.
The $60,000, is that gross sales or is that gross profit?
Sales.
Sales, gross sales period.
Yes, gross sales. Yep. Right now we have Matt Behrends up here with us. He is, like they said earlier, part of our fermentation class, and he's going to do a demonstration on fermenting foods and hot sauce. I'll let him tell you a little bit more about this.
Hello. As she said, I'm Matt Behrends. I work with the fermentation distillation program as well as managing the kitchen back here that you guys will get to see at lunch. And I'll just start off by talking a little bit about fermented foods. You can see here, this is a demo I did for the class where I was making sauerkraut. And this is also a picture of when we were helping Rising Suns Winery with doing their jams and jellies. Next slide. Some of the demos we've done for the class is kombucha also. This is Dr. Tope. He is around here somewhere. They were making kombuchas and infusing them with different stuff. Next. And then just some of the other stuff we've done is sourdough starters. That was a new one for me this year. This was the best loaf that I've had come out. And then a sauerkraut. This one is dill and mustard seed. We have done taste testings with them. This one tasted well. And I like this one because it turns any hot dog into a Chicago-style hot dog. I'm from Illinois, so I got to plug them whenever I can. And then next to it, we got kimchi. This is a more traditional one. And then I've also done a cucumber kimchi that was reminiscent of a restaurant that I've been to back home that only needs to ferment overnight. It turned out pretty well. And then here's just kind of a booth displaying some of the stuff I've done. And this was at Bourbon on the Banks. And it's showcasing these are our roulette peppers that we've been growing and doing a lot with. They look hot, but they are habaneros with no heat. So they're a great conversation piece, and they're very waxy and they look great. So when you're making a hot sauce, the first thing you want to think about is what peppers do you want to use, because they, and how hot you want your sauce. This one, we started with habaneros, but wanted to kind of mild that out a little bit because that's a little bit much. So depending on how spicy you like it. And also, one thing you think about when you're processing, the spiciness goes in the air. You will start coughing before you even smell it. So the hotter, you got to just be careful in being well-ventilated areas. Also, with different peppers, cayennes are more of an instant heat. Habaneros are more of a building heat. So kind of you can mix them, match them based on what you like and what's going to complement what you're going with. So when you're going to think about making a hot sauce, you want to pick what color you're going to do it first. I've done greens, yellows, but this mixture of red and orange gives me a really nice scarlet color. And also, some peppers you can pick green and red, so you want to decide if you're going to pick them green or pick them red, because if you start mixing them, it's going to get a brown sauce. It's not going to look great, but still tastes fine. And then another thing is the size of the peppers. These are both small peppers. I like them. They're very prolific, and they're easy to process. If you get bigger peppers, it involves more chopping. So these are harder to pick, but easier to process. And then just some of the different peppers I've used over the years in different mixes. The middle one is green. That was habaneros in green Big Jims. This is, which one's first? This one. Okay. Every year I just kind of order from Joni Seeds, and then I stick with the ones I like and just order 3 or 4 new ones every year, just kind of test them out. We've had fish peppers, Catarinas, St. Croix, which is another sweet pepper. Someone described it as almost a soda taste. It was very strange. And it made an interesting sauce. You can see in the second one, there's a mix of red and yellow. That was a yellow cayenne that we had one year that I had a lot of fun with. But that was just a mix of 2 different cayennes. So typically, just experiment with them, find what you like. A lot of these had different tastes, but I've stuck with the roulette and habanero mix is my favorite. Next. So as you can see, these pictures show when they were first processed and then after 27 days of fermenting, because if you're going to be selling it, you need to know about how the color holds up. So you can see that the green kind of loses a lot of its color. It's not as shelf appealing, but the reds keep them really nice. The yellow fades a little bit. But when you're, after you've picked your peppers and you're getting ready to process them, you need to make sure that you have enough salt to let them ferment and keep any bad bacteria from growing. And when you're doing that, you need to make sure you get the right salt too, because if you get by just classic table salt, it has iodine in it. That can cause cloudiness. It can mess with your fermentation. So you want to go with a non-iodized salt that can be free-flowing, kosher, pink Himalayan, and you're going to want to get your brine ratio at between 2 and 5%. That's your sweet spot where nothing's growing, but the fermentation can still occur. The way I do this is I make my brine separate. Some people do it by volume. Some people do it by weight. I do 3 tablespoons of salt per 4 cups of water. That gets me a little above the 5%, but then once you add it to your peppers, it's going to pull some moisture out of there, and it's going to drop you back into that range. I'm always a little weary, so I try to stay at the upper end of that. And then aging, you can do it as long as you want, as short as you want, a couple days, a couple weeks. I usually do 27 days, but Tabasco does theirs for 3 years in barrels. And then once you're ready to start processing, we've tried a lot of different methods for a lot of different stuff, and just trying to figure out what works best. This first one is just using a gigantic immersion blender, putting the peppers and some brine in a bucket and just blending it up. If you're doing it smaller scale, you can just use food processor like I'll be using today. And bottling, we have tried bottling lots of different methods with funnels, with that yellow thing you see there is a bottle filler. We tried to use that, but the sauce that I make is chunky, so it ended up just pressurizing it and making it explode all over me. So in order to fix that, we actually found that turkey basters work pretty well for filling small bottles. And as you can see here, here's some of the sauces I made. The green one, again, not very appealing. The yellow one actually stood out pretty bright, and then the reds, they hold their color pretty well. So we actually just debuted our thorough burn hot sauce, shown here, at our legislative fish fry earlier this month, and this is the recipe for it. 5 cups of fermented peppers. I let them go 27 days. 1 1/3 cups white vinegar, 1/2 cup of brine, and it makes about 11 5-ounce bottles. This is a bit more of a vinegary sauce, but I like vinegar, so that's why we stick it that way. And then I think that's all of them. Yeah, so then now I will show you. This here, I started earlier this week. It will actually be used for our Benson lunch at the end of next month. And like I said, with these small peppers, I like them because we're just going to be chopping off the tops, but they're so small, I just take my thumb, pop the top off. If they're fresh, give them a little crunch, help those cell walls break down, and just throw them in. This ratio is, for every habanero pepper, we're putting 2 roulette peppers because they are habaneros without the heat. So you're still getting that kind of floral taste from them, but you can actually enjoy it instead of just setting your mouth on fire. So I got 20 roulettes and 10 habaneros here. The roulettes have been frozen, but these roulettes are fresh. You do want to make sure that if you are using frozen peppers, it could have killed the natural yeasts on there, so you always want to try to use something fresh, or if you don't have the option of using any fresh peppers, you can take one of your previous ferments and just add a little juice, and that way you're getting those that lactobacillus back in there, and it can get to work doing its thing. Like I said, these are very easy to process. With the bigger peppers, you have to start chopping them into a lot of different parts. And we're filling this jar pretty full, but we do want to leave enough headspace because it will be releasing, it will be converting stuff in here to carbon dioxide and releasing gas. So we got it pretty much covered, but you want to make sure everything is completely submerged. So we're going to make some brine here. And when you're looking for a water source, also you want to use unchlorinated water because chlorine can also mess with things. So this is spring water. You can get it Kroger. And we're doing 4 cups. With 3 tablespoons of our free-flowing salt. No iodine, very important. Yes. If anyone couldn't hear, he asked if the water in here was spring water, and it is. It has all come from this jug. And you do want to use gloves when doing this because habaneros are very hot. And apparently earlier this morning I touched one without realizing it because I touched my face earlier and it started burning. So you got to be very careful. So you're just adding enough to make sure everything's covered. And they are going to want to float still. So if you don't have a water weight or if you're doing a big thing like this, you can just use a Ziploc bag. You want to fill it with brine, whatever concentration you're using in your ferment, just in case it does spring a leak and starts leaking. You don't want it to dilute anything. You want it to still hold that salinity. So you stick this in there, make sure everything's covered. And now we're just going to seal it up and watch this. I'll burp it every few days for the next month. And then after that's been going a while, you can see here that it starts to get a bit cloudy. That's your fermentation at work. And now we are going to process some of this one. So you're going to want to start by draining off your brine. But you want to reserve it for later because we will be adding some of it back in. Reserving a little bit of that for later. And then just measure this out. This is what a water weight looks like if you have them. They come with kits you can get on Amazon. And we're a little under 5 cups here, so we'll make a half batch of what I showed on the screen there. So we've got about 3 cups of peppers. And then we are going to use, instead of the 1 1/3 cups of vinegar, we are just going to use 2/3. This is just white vinegar. You can use other vinegars if you like, but they will drastically change the flavor. And then we didn't drain them super well, so we're going to do a little less than 1/4 cup of brine. And this is just to taste and for consistency. So you can add more brine if you want it a little saltier. You can add more vinegar if it's more or less vinegar based on taste. And just blend it till it's smooth. From this point, you can strain it if you like. I don't mind a chunky sauce, so I don't bother, because you start to lose a lot of mass if you want to start doing that. And then we're just going to take it. If it's going to work for me today. Turkey base is not one to cooperate very well, so we're going to switch to a funnel. And the main thing you want to make sure of when you're doing this is you still want to add enough vinegar to get that pH low enough to kill off your lactobacillus, because that is what's fermenting and still producing gas. So if it's still alive, then these are building pressure and could turn into little fridge bombs. So you want to leave little headspace. And then these bottles got off Amazon. They're Woozy bottles, 5 ounce, and they come with little dash tops and caps. And then you have hot sauce. You can sprinkle on anything. I usually use this one with nachos, and usually nachos. It's really gone on. And that's as easy it is to make hot sauce. Any questions? Do we have any questions? Yes. So her question was, if you are making a sauce with frozen peppers, how much do you need to add from a previous ferment in order to get it going? You don't need much. If you have an old ferment, I usually just do a splash. You're really just trying to introduce the lactobacillus. From there, it can reproduce and keep going on its own. If you don't have a previous ferment, you cannot buy like sauerkraut from the store and use that. You would have to, you could hope on luck, or you could potentially just lightly wash your hands, because your hands will have some yeasts on them. And as long as you're getting a little bit of yeast in there, but have the salt content enough so no bacteria can grow, that could be a way of introducing it. But also going off of that, I didn't mention, home fermenting is a lot better for prebiotics and stuff, because if you go out to the store and buy their sauerkraut, it has been heat treated. So it takes all those healthy gut bacteria and it kills them off. So if you do it at home, then you can make sure those are alive and you're actually getting the benefits of them. Any other questions? Yes. This is shelf stable. If there's enough vinegar, so we have not had any explode from it, and I have had some sitting out for 2 years. They're good. Once you start using it, though, it probably is best to refrigerate it, because if you're repeatedly opening it, oxygen can get in there and start changing the color and quality. Yes.
So is that a product you can sell, like at a farmer's market then?
We are currently getting the recipe FDA approved, and then we would be able to sell it at farmers markets, potentially.
Yes, we actually have the label approved and the recipe, and we just need to have the FDA come in and watch us process it, and then we can sell it commercially. So, but if you wanted to do this at home, home-based, you wouldn't have to go through that whole process. You could just do it under the home-based processing rules and regulations they have here in the state. But you still have to have that home-based processing label on that label.
No.
Does the spring water versus like just using tap water affect the processing?
So his question was, does using spring water versus tap water affect the process? Spring water is chlorine-free. A lot of tap water has chlorine in it, so if you do want to use that, you want to try to let it sit out so that can gas off, just because it can, if there's a lot, it can kill off that natural yeast and active bacteria. Yes.
With general lactofermentation, are those products sellable under the home-based processing license, or is it because you add, I mean, home-based processing laws, or is it because you added the vinegar that makes it shelf-stable?
Vinegar. You acidified it, so you brought that pH down. We know the pH of this one is, what was it last time we checked?
I want to say between 2 and 3, like 2.7.
Yeah, it was like 2.7 or 3, I think the pH was. So we're way below the threshold, which is 4.6. I don't really like for anything, honestly, that I work with to be above 4.2 when I first put it in the jars, because like I said, it could go up or down depending on consistency or viscosity of the product that's in it.
Yes.
To the recipe. So you have, because you have vinegar in the brine already, right? And then you add vinegar.
The brine itself is just salt and
It's
water.
just the salt,
Yes.
okay.
So the only addition of vinegar is when you're bottling it or ready to process it.
It's the salt in the brine that lowers the water activity. Even though it looks like it has a lot of water in it, the salt makes it to where it's not available water.
I just wanted to know if we could see the recipe again. I didn't get to write it down.
Yeah. Okay. Yes.
An unopened bottle that's shelf stable, how long could it sit there?
So with the red ones, I have had them out for, like I said, 2 years, and they still look fine. I haven't tasted them, but typically in that time they might just, the flavors might change a little bit, but since the pH is so low, it's more based on appearance. So like the yellow one I made, that one kind of separated out and lost all of its color and didn't really look good after about 10 months to a year. But with these, as long as they look good and there's nothing growing on the top of them, they're stable. Any other questions? All right, thank you.